People have said if it isn't lump, it isn't charcoal, so I bought 7 different brands to see which one is best, to see if it's worth spending a little bit more for the premium options, and which is the best performer. And in the first test, I took a look at the average chunk size coming straight out of the top of the bag. First up is Expert Grills, coming from Walmart, and this one was made in Mexico. At 74 cents a pound, it was the cheapest and it had a good range of medium-sized chunks. Cowboy Charcoal, made by Duraflame, with oak and hickory flavor, came in at 86 cents a pound. It has small pieces with a few medium-sized pieces in there. Royal Oak for the Pitmaster and all of us came in at 97 cents a pound and had mostly small pieces. Fogo Premium Charcoal, taste the difference, came in at $1.13 a pound. It had lots of big pieces and they were a pretty consistent size too. Kamado Joe Big Block came in at $1.15 a pound and it claims to have some of the biggest chunks in the world, and it was the biggest one that I had tested. This chunk right here was 400 grams all by itself, and that is pretty impressive. B&B, also from Duraflame, says a little goes a long way, and it came in at $1.15 a pound. It also had the biggest variety of small, medium, and large size pieces. Jealous Devil Extra Large Lump was the most expensive one that I tested at $1.25 a pound, but I got it at an amazing deal and it came to $1 a pound. And it had mostly medium, but also some large size pieces. And you'll see why chunk size matters a little bit later in the video. For the next test, I wanted to see which ones light the easiest, burn with the least amount of ash, and if any of them put off some yucky smoke when they're first being lit. So I took as close as I could to 500 grams of each charcoal and put it in separate pie tins so that way I could light them up and capture all of the ash. And as I was doing that, I was pretty surprised at the difference in volume between the different brands. So I pulled over at Mrs. GTE and had her sort them out by which ones she felt took up the most room in the pie tin. And she found that Cowboy and Royal Oak took up the most amount of space, with Expert Grills trailing right behind, and those were the budget brands. And that means that they have lower density than the more expensive brands that I'm testing. And that becomes really important when you're doing a long, low, and slow cook, because you want to be able to fit as much charcoal inside of your cooker as possible, so that way you don't have to refuel in the middle of it. So back at the grills for the burn-in test, I was a little bit concerned that the large chunk size from the Kamado Joe charcoal, so I smashed it with a hammer because I know that's something that other people have done when they need to do different kinds of cooks. Then I added a Weber lighter cube in each pie tin, set them on separate grills, and lit them each one by one, close the lids, and let them burn out. And as they lit, Jealous Devil put off almost no smoke, which was pretty similar to what happened in the briquette test. The other ones put off a little bit of smoke, but none of them were as bad as the thick white smoke that you'd see with a lot of briquette brands out there. Royal Oak and Fogo both had the most unburned charcoal at the end of this test, but for very different reasons. Royal Oak has a lot of small pieces, and I figured that the ash probably snuffed out the rest of the fire before it could burn. Fogo has a lot of airspace because of that density and odd shapes, that I didn't have it close enough to make sure everything stayed hot enough to keep burning. With that one, I don't think that would be a real big problem with a longer cook because it'd have more charcoal around it to be able to keep it burning. And the two winners for this test were Kamado Joe and B&B, which both had between 13 and 16% of their fuel left unburned in the pie tin. And this test represents a complaint that a lot of people have about lump because they're going to think that it's lit, and then when they go to cook it actually starts to burn out, or the temperatures drop once you dump it in your cooker. And with these two, once they're lit, they're way more likely to burn all the way through on their own, which is a huge plus in that situation. And surprisingly, Cowboy and Expert Grills were right behind with 22% left of unburned charcoal, which is pretty impressive considering they came in 3rd and 4th place, and they're all the budget brands. The next test is to put some charcoal in a chimney and then cook a chicken thigh on every single one of these charcoal brands for a flavor test. For this one, I poured whatever came out of the bag to get it to be about 3/4 full of a chimney of charcoal. And it didn't matter if the chunks came out were big or small, I just let them be because that is what came out of the bag and it would be a better test for a real life cook. Then I lit one single Weber starter cube underneath the chimney and let it go. And most of the charcoal brands were fully lit after about 12 minutes in the chimney, but Kamado Joe took twice as long, and then Jealous Devil ended up needing an extra lighter cube just to keep it going after I lost my patience and didn't want to wait any longer. And that's one of the reasons why you'll see people use multiple lighter cubes or giant tumbleweeds when they're lighting their lump charcoal, because some of those big chunks take a lot more effort to get going. Once the charcoal was fully lit, I took the chimney and held it over the Weber kettle and then gave it a quick shake to see how much sparks would come off. Now, Royal Oak was the only one that put on the show. Now, most of the brands are going to crackle and pop, but for me, it's only a concern if those sparks go flying while you're cooking. For each brand, I added a boneless, skinless chicken thigh that was only seasoned with salt directly over the coals, so that way we could see if there's any differences in the flavor and how it cooked. Expert Grill lost a lot of heat as I had the charcoal in there, so I had to take off the lid just to be able to get it to cook, and I didn't get a very good sear or char on it. All the other ones did really well and had that final sear just by taking off the lid to get things nice and hot. And two brands, Jealous Devil and B&B, gave a good char with the lid on, which is pretty impressive considering the results of the other ones, and might come in handy if you're, say, searing a steak where you want to get as much heat as possible. And as far as flavor goes, none of them were bad, which is more than I can say for the charcoal briquette test that I did earlier. In fact, Fogo was a step ahead of all of these ones and had a really amazing flavor to it, which makes sense considering they say that the charcoal is the first ingredient. All the other ones were just fine, but that one really stood out. So which charcoal ended up being the best? For me, it really depends on the type of cook that you're doing. If you're budget-minded, Cowboy charcoal did the best on average out of all the budget brands in all of the tests. Kamado Joe burned really clean, and the big chunk sizes would be good for long, low and slow cooks, which makes a lot of sense considering they make Kamados and they use this charcoal in those. If I could only have one of the premium charcoal options, I would go with B&B, and that's because it burns really clean and the smaller chunk size makes it a lot easier to light, which gives it a good range for direct cooking as well as long, low, and slow cooks. And if flavor is your #1 priority, of course, the winner was Fogo, and I would save this one for those direct cooks when it really matters.